Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hello, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. This is the Organic Wine Podcast, and my guests are Stephen Hagen and Andrew Smith, and we're talking about Antiquum Farm in Oregon. Antiquum is Stephen's family farm where he practices grazing-based viticulture, or what he calls joy-based agriculture. And I believe he's doing for grape farming what Joel Salatin has done for regular farming. Antiquum is a vineyard ecosystem specifically designed to enable nearly year-round, high-intensity managed grazing of kune pigs, sheep, geese, chickens, and ducks in the vineyard, though not necessarily in that order. Stephen describes in detail the infrastructure, practical considerations, animal breeds, resources, and much, much more that is necessary to make this system work and to make it possible to produce wine that is 100% true to place. This is a must listen for anyone considering maintaining a year-round herd and incorporating them in the vineyard, or for anyone who just wants to hear an example of some incredible earth-first agriculture and how it impacts the wine that comes from it. This ecosystem requires zero outside inputs for fertility. This closed-loop, holistic farm continually increases the distinctiveness and richness of the soil microbiome, which has had dramatic effects on the grape's morphology, chemistry, and flavor. If you really believe in terroir, Stephen and Andrew have taken this concept to such an extreme that I think it redefines it. This is such a compelling perspective that I think it challenges a majority of the claims to terroir in the wine world. If you want to be inspired by what could be possible for the future of wine, or if you want to save 15 years of trial and error in grazing-based viticulture, prepare for a 20 terabit download. And don't be surprised if you start hearing the name Antiquum, however you pronounce it, a lot more often. Enjoy. Stephen, Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here with you.
It is a real pleasure. I, haven't yet tasted your wines, but when I found out about you guys, I just knew I wanted to talk to you and had to talk to you and had to share what you guys are doing with everybody that I could. And you guys are in Oregon, and if I don't know who wants to take the lead here, but maybe you could start with where you are and sort of the layout of your vineyard farm operation.
Stephen.
Yeah. Okay. we're in the southern end of the Willamette Valley in Oregon. So specifically the town is called Junction City. So we're about, I'm going to say 25 miles northwest of Eugene, a couple hours south of Portland. And
which is not, it's not the what most people think of as Oregon wine country, which is a little further like north of Salem up through to Portland, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
so we're
or further south down
right.
in the sort of wherever that is, I forget, Roseland area.
Right, and there's sometimes a misconception that when we say the southern Willamette Valley, that we are in southern Oregon. So that is a completely different growing region when you get down into the Rogue and the Umpqua and the Applegate Valley. There's actually a newly formed and approved AVA down on this end of the valley called the Lower Long Tom, and that is like brand spanking new, maybe a month old at the most. So, there will be more information and hopefully accolades as that moves forward. But we are at the very southern end of the Willamette Valley, which actually terminates in Eugene. And then if you climb a little more south and tuck back into the next valley, you're now technically into the like Crow and Lorraine Valley. So we're at the very southern end, and then there's kind of a western shelf on the west side of the valley, and there's a kind of higher portion of the coastal range at that southern end that spans between the Alsea River to the north of us, so up by Corvallis, and then the Siuslaw River to the south of us. That higher portion of the coastal range kind of creates a bit of a weather shadow, and there, if you're not right in those river corridors, we miss a significant amount of rain, and temperatures tend to, in in large portions of that area, we're a little more protected. So temperatures can run a little higher. There's a little less disease pressure, and things like that. A little less precipitation during the growing season.
Got it. And what's the farm like?
So the farm, as you come west in the valley, you move into really nice, beautiful rolling hills, and then there's some high elevation ridges that kind of run east to west on that western shelf to the valley, and so the farm is mostly northern slope, and it's just mixed forest. So there's a lot of forestry stewardship that is part of the 150-year vision of this farm, and how to we're working with ways to incorporate food production and foraging into our work and lifestyle here. And then there are two very kind of small and narrow vineyard sites on the property. So one is lower in elevation, and that's where we have our Pinot Gris planted. It's a 6-acre vineyard on about 7.5-acre site. So we have a big garden site down below that. We've got a little small orchard that is kind of just getting started, honestly. And then there's 6 acres of Pinot Gris on this kind of lower elevation, deeper soil. Lots of sort of stream bed cobble rock buried into the soils there, and that's like lower elevation and yet cooler. And then you climb almost 150 feet in elevation to the next ridge to the south, and then just as you tuck over the top of that ridge, you find this half-mile long vineyard site that at its widest point is maybe 450 feet wide. So it's like this long sort of airport strip, and it's a polar opposite vineyard site, in that despite the fact that it's high, it's warm in the daytime, but then that high elevation, you get this huge diurnal shift, and so it's really cold at night. And the soils are really, really thin. So top soils are, in vast portions of the vineyard, you're running anywhere from maybe 7 to 14 inches before you're hitting sandstone. And our deepest portions are maybe 24 inches deep, and then you hit sandstone. So they're really cool soils.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what was the size of the higher vineyard?
The upper vineyard, the current planting is 14.5 acres, and then we have about another 10 acres below that we still have not planted. We are
okay.
I'm kind of waiting to see what how my children's lives shake out, maybe through their mid-20s, and see where they settle and what they do. The current reality is that with the way that I have chosen to farm, there are just limitations to how much we can take care of and how much.
Yeah, those 20 acres are probably work.
Yeah, I mean because it kind of tucked into the vineyard operations. There's also, poultry farming and waterfowl, and we're, it'd be a little grandiose to say that we're sheep ranching, but like we're doing a lot of other small scale farming things that are all incorporated into the vineyard, and those things take their fair share of time as well. So it's a lot more than just managing 20 acres of vineyard to farm in this grazing-based viticultural system that we've created. So there are limitations of what I can do, and I am kind of either waiting for that perfect farm employee that would free up the time to allow us to bite off more, or really to see what my son and daughter decide that they want to do.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, now, so you said how much is forested of your area?
Gosh, the whole farm is 140 acres. I'm going to say there's probably 95-ish acres that are forested.
More majority forested. And what is the aspect of the two vineyard sites? Are they north facing as well?
They are both directly south facing. So if you picture if you picture that in the Pinot Gris site, the lowest elevation site, which is also the north property line, that you're coming down a south slope, and then you hit just a little bit of bottom ground where we have a little local stream here called Turnbow Creek. So there's a nice big farm pond that's about 2 acres. There's some pasture surrounding that. You go right up above that, there's our home site, and you're climbing up north slope through the forest, and then it bends back to the south, and then you hit the other vineyard sites up at higher elevation as you climb
Got
over
it.
that ridge.
Okay, got it. Yeah, lovely. Well, that's a good overview layout. Now, you mentioned quite a few animals, and and you guys practice what you call grazing-based viticulture,
Correct.
which I love that term. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll dig into some of the details of that, because I know
Yeah,
there's some
absolutely.
juicy details there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fun, just kind of joy-based way of farming. To be perfectly honest, and this is always great to say on something called the Organic Wine Podcast, but like I did not get into this because I had some sort of love affair with wine. I think every wine grower and winemaker that I've ever met has this story about like this pivotal moment of like, oh, I was sitting on a beach and somewhere, and I had this glass of wine, and I had this epiphany that this is what I had to do with my life. I don't have that moment. Um, I came to this because um, out of a desire to raise my family in a certain way and instill a certain set of ethics and values, and I really just have this great love for the craft and the art of farming. I think that farming, at its worst, can represent some of the worst impulses of humanity. It can be, just running roughshod over a piece of ground to make a dollar.
Mm,
It can be about greed and impatience and lack of vision, but but on the other side, it can be about you know these beautiful human traits of empathy and kindness and stewardship and family, and I think
community, and
yeah,
yeah,
community. It represents the possibility to share some of our very best human impulses. Um,
yeah,
so that's what I wanted to get into. Um,
yeah,
and so when we first planted the vineyard, of course, for me, it began as like, well, obviously we're going to farm this organically. Um, uh, but I was also, being very new to wine at all, I kept hearing about this concept of terroir. And I was trying to wrap my head around it and what did it really mean. But I was coming at it from this really newbie standpoint, um, and asking like some very innocent, ignorant, but also at the same time, I think they were really meaningful questions of like, you what is this? What is this thing? And tell me how to do it. Like just give me the list of what I do to make that happen. That sounds awesome. I want that. And and as I was talking to a lot of winemakers and a lot of growers, like the answers that I got just they just never made any sense to me. They it kind of felt like I was in the press corps asking politicians questions, and that like you just get this like one layer answer, and then sometimes a deflection. And it wasn't that I felt that people were being evasive by any means. Like I think that people are all, that for the most part, people are always trying their hardest and doing their best and have good intentions. Um, I just wasn't. It just felt to me like I wasn't sure that people had asked the right questions or deep enough questions. Um,
yeah,
so for me, like the light bulb that really went off was one day I was out um, spreading organic amendments, in late winter, early spring before bud break, and the question just popped into my head. I was kind of thinking about terroir, and I just thought like, well, where does this stuff come from? That I'm,
yeah,
all these certified amendments, like where are they from? And I realized I really didn't know. And as I started diving into that question, seeing that those things, those materials came from an incredibly limited set of source points, and then the light bulb also going off of like, oh my God, not only does this have nothing to do with this site or my farm or even the Willamette Valley or even the Pacific Northwest, like it's also the same stuff that everybody else is using. And is that not homogenizing my site with everyone else? Um, eh, and so I kind of begin asking myself, follow-up questions of, when we have these ideas of like a representation of a region in wine, how much of that is, not the soil, not the weather, but the growing culture, the activities of the farming activities, and that people, and it's a good thing. There's a sense of community. People talk to each other, but there also becomes these things that like people, one person says something and another person repeats it, and it becomes a fact, and there becomes a way that we just go about doing things. And I just kind of decided in my youth and arrogance and ignorance, I was like, you know what? I don't think anybody, I don't think anybody is doing this right, or at least in a way that like makes sense to me, that I can feel in my heart, and and that it feels like an honest pursuit to me. I'm going to do something else,
And
yeah.
now, does that tie into, because I know you dry farm as well. Is that
Yes,
correct?
correct. Yeah. Yes.
Does the idea of terroir tie into that? Because I always am like, how can you talk about terroir in an irrigated vineyard, like in an
Yeah.
entirely irrigated vineyard? It's like that's
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
in just a small way, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry.
We do dry farm. We have a frost protection system in our Pinot Gris that, in some years we turn on maybe 3 times in early spring. Most years we end up not using it, but the years where we use it, it saves the vintage. But that, I don't. That's
Yeah.
actually at a time of year where there's still a ton of rainfall, and I don't really consider it irrigation. But
Yeah. No.
outside of that, yeah, we do dry farm. It um, and that again, here it's more about, a real underpinning of grazing-based viticulture is, and this is everything from dry farming to our breeding selection for our sheep and our pigs and everything else on the farm, is to, as a way of incorporating the idea of terroir into everything that we do, is that things have to get by with the resources that we have available. So, like, if we're
Yeah.
going out and drilling some really deep well and pulling water up out of the aquifer in order to effectively grow vines, then maybe we shouldn't be growing vines. Or maybe we're
Right.
selecting the wrong vines, or we haven't put our vines through enough trial to allow them the opportunity to show us that they can thrive. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So it's like taking a breeding program with our sheep. It would be like if in year 1, 2, 3, and 4 we did all kinds of things to baby those sheep to allow the sheep that maybe cannot thrive on this land to stay in the program, and
Right.
so we end up with something that is more work and less economical and less sustainable as a
Right.
result. So you got to go through those tough times in order to build the vigor and resilience in all of the life that's on this farm, to truly tap the potential of the concept.
Okay. I'm going to pause on this because I definitely want to come back and dig into the details of having these animals in the vineyard and things like that. I also just wanted to comment. I love this idea that you brought up, that asking where does this thing come from that I use every day or that I use regularly is this revolutionary question, honestly,
Right.
if you pursue it honestly back
Yeah.
to the very source of where these things that we and that's with food, that's with water, that's with the wine, the products that we use every day. I think that's so profound. Also, we haven't heard from Andrew, and I just want to turn to Andrew since we were sort of talking origin stories, and Andrew, ask you. I know a little bit. I think you and I have some very interesting commonalities of having, had a religious upbringing, getting into philosophy, and then that leading us to wine.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you can sort of talk about how you ended up where you are with working with Stephen.
Yeah, through that mechanism, and including life working in restaurants while trying to figure out, am I doing a master's in theology or psychology, or maybe it's time to go get a JD
Right.
and become a lawyer. Like, what do I do with these
Right.
these
Or in my
intellectual?
case, like working in restaurants because graduating with a degree in religion had no practical application in the world.
I feel that very, very deeply, very deeply, prayerfully. I feel it prayerfully. But I think that funny enough, in my world, it actually has been the deeply profound religious upbringing and a connection to that, that I think led to the profound encounter with wine. One of my sort of favorite pieces about the world of wine, especially looking at a European context, is that on some level it would be very doubtful that we would have the world of wine as we know it today without the church.
Yeah.
For instance, all of the mapping of Burgundy would have been unattainable if it was left to a peasant class, without the labor of monks, and without the financial support of the church. So when you have,
Mm.
this is when you have free labor,
Right.
essentially, in dedication to an order or a sect, you can get a lot of work done. Yeah, that's my understanding. And then, of course, the tie of the Eucharist, in from the history of the Western world, and of the religious um, context of what that has looked like. Like the tie of the Eucharist to it, of course, promotes that downstream and still continues today. And I find those pieces really interesting. Even to the point, I remember going to the Episcopal Cathedral, and when I was living in Seattle, Washington, and I was there for Christmas Eve, midnight mass, and watching. It was the first time that I had been to that kind of like high church sort of experience, and watching the procession and the way that they were performing that ritual of the Eucharist, and I'm watching it and going, holy crap, like that is everything that I have been trained to do in that current time as a sommelier. When I go to a table, the way that we
Right.
set things down, the way we present glasses, how we taste, that at least in an older cultural place of having a testavan, that like that's also present in that high church experience of the Eucharist. And so you just see those connections, and that sort of intellectual piece of it has always been fascinating to me. And then combining that with having grown up in agricultural families, with history both in the Midwest and in the Southern United States, and knowing the value of hard work, and that even in intellectual endeavors, there's some amazing practical and creative outlays that can happen. And so digging deep into the earth, while continuing to think about the why. I mean, I'm a deep lover of Wendell and
Mm.
find his writing, whether it's in essays or poetry, and then of course in his practical farming in Kentucky. Um,
Yeah.
I find it deeply resonant, and so I think when you encounter uh, people in this instance like Stephen, who is living out those pieces both intellectually and creatively and heartfelt and with morals and ethics, and a drive to see the world better. Like it's hard to say no to that. We tried to start a cult this past year during the pandemic.
I was gonna say, you were talking about how much you can get done with free labor. You have these acres that haven't been planted.
Yeah.
All you need is a cult there.
Well, it was. I'll be honest, and I, we really want to give attribution where it's due. It was Stephen's idea, but there was, I think that as we strive for like deeper, more connective experiences, we do want to bring other people into that. So that even in our local community, where the two towns of Eugene and Corvallis are about 30 minutes from the farm in general, it's still a distance for people to come, and they often come, for a pastoral vision or for a little bit of escape. And we want to be able to offer Antiquum Farm as something that they can take back home, not just as bottles, but as principles and values, and find those places of themselves in our work and how they integrate that into their daily lives. Because if it's just about wine, it's not going to do us all a whole lot of good in the end. Yeah.
I would just throw this out as since we're on the topic of sort of, spirituality, which I use that term with, light quotes, and wine. Have you read the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam?
I have
probably
not.
mispronounce it. Highly recommend it. I mean, so Rubaiyat are like are quatrains. It's like poetic quatrains. So there's many Rubaiyat out there, but the famous compilation is known as Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and he was like a Persian philosopher and whatnot, poet obviously, and I think he was a scientist as well. And it's all about mortality and wine wine. I mean, it's wine soaked metaphor throughout, and it's beautiful at times. It's where if you've ever heard a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and thou, that's from the Rubaiyat, from that collection.
Well, and this definitely feels like, given what we're talking about, I can't purchase this from Amazon right now. I need to go find it in a bookstore somewhere.
Yes. I mean, I might have, I've pretty much every used bookstore I go into, I try to find some, really, they're usually really beautiful copies because there's like Persian script and there's each quatrain is, if you get a really nice book, is illustrated and it's got these old illustrations. It's really, most of these books, if you can find them out in the world, are these little gems that are just little, it's amazing. So yeah, it's a fun hunt to go on. I definitely recommend that as a quest.
Love it.
Oddly enough, to interject, on the cutting room floor for names of Antiquum Farm was "and thou." So my father-in-law was a big fan of the Rubaiyat, and that it didn't make it to the final name list, but it was on the list at one point in time when we were brainstorming names.
I'm writing that down for a new wine label, Stephen.
All right,
there you go. Well, great. I thank you for sharing that, Andrew. And you don't get me geeking out on this stuff because, like I said, I have a degree in it, so you've got to stop me. But I want to get back to the animals and the birds and everything. So if I'm correct, there are sheep, a specific cross of sheep. There are kune pigs.
Correct.
If I'm pronouncing that right. There's some like very fun ducks, chickens, quails, big meat quails. It sounds like. Now those I imagine are not running through the vineyard because that is correct.
They are not. The quail are only here because I love to eat them. There's geese,
and you sell the eggs if people want to raise their own quail. Or, we start their own sort of quail business with quail eggs or meat birds.
So we offer fertilized quail eggs and fertilized duck eggs when they're in season. Everything that we raise is also part of the kind of product offering array that we have as well. But there's geese, which I am a goose advocate. I think that they're the most sort of underrated, like sustainable protein choice that people can raise. And what else do we have going on? Yeah.
I have a hard question for you. Okay. Ducks and geese, well, ducks especially are adorable. And I know that, from what I've heard, that they really bond with humans. They really, especially, if they can sometimes even sort of imprint on specific humans if they
Right.
want to.
Yeah.
How hard is it when it comes time to eating a duck, or do you not do
Haha.
that?
Yeah, about that. We do not eat the
This
ducks.
is a very good question.
This
Okay.
is you just really poked on a sore spot.
Yeah, no,
So
I've heard this from
so
multiple homesteaders that it's like the
yeah,
ducks are just like, they're just too cute. Like the eggs, it's great. You raise them for the eggs and for slug control and all the
right.
other wonderful things, their poop. But when it comes to eating them, it's like nobody wants that job.
Yeah, so I mean, I personally do not have an issue with it. I think
Okay.
I have a very kind of, I don't know, it works for me, I recognize that it's a very kind of abnormal stance around, food production, home based food production. But for me personally, it, like processing an animal that you've raised, um, it is almost like this kind of act of intimacy for me. Like it is the
Hmm.
final thing
Yeah.
that ties me to my home, and I know going in that's why we're all here. you know
Yeah. Yeah.
so like it's never like it's not my favorite day. I don't
Right.
savor the task, but it's
Right.
part of the necessity of running this farm, that I also find a lot of meaning and beauty in. That said, we do not process ducks here. They are my daughter's ducks.
Okay.
And there's only about 20. I think right now there's about 27 ducks. So they are not, the geese are by far, like, they are here in numbers that is truly impactful to the vineyard. And anybody that has ever known a goose well would have no problem with processing a goose because they are assholes. So if you spend an hour in the company of the goose, you're ready for processing. But so one of the things that we've just over time, as my kids were growing up, it was always important to me to have them working in some degree or another in this operation. And so part of that is, I also don't want to be asking them to take part, but not give them some degree of control. And so for my daughter, the birds were always kind of her thing. And so
Yeah.
for years, we did not process chickens. We only sold eggs,
Mm.
and we still do not process ducks. But chickens just last year, so she is now 19, and last year she finally, because she eats chicken, like her favorite food is
Right.
duck.
Right.
Like, she loves duck breast.
Yeah.
That's her favorite thing. We're having it tomorrow night. But they aren't our ducks.
Right.
So it was just finally last year we raised our first batch. We raised, I think, 150 meat chickens, and that was the first time where she'd finally said, "Okay, look, I'm going off to college. Like, if you want to do this, it's fine." And then she
Yeah.
actually took part and helped out and was very happy about it. So,
Oh,
so
that's
little
very
evolution.
cool.
Yeah, but
Yeah. No, I mean, in all seriousness, no, the same thing. I mean, we have chickens here in our backyard, and from time to time we've had roosters that I've had to process. And
hmm
like you said, it's not enjoyable. I don't think it
hmm
should be enjoyable,
no,
but I do feel like I'm doing for them better than somebody else that didn't know them would do. And
exactly.
I
Yeah.
also feel a deep responsibility as somebody who eats meat of
hmm
many kinds, of all kinds, to
hmm
be able to do that, to look the animal in the eye and know that,
Right.
like, it's giving its life so that I can continue to live. Like, I think that's really important, and distancing yourself from that is actually the unhealthy way
E-
to approach meat.
Exactly.
And yeah, so I mean, I hear you, and I just wanted to ask because at some point, I know I love
Yeah.
duck as well, and at some
Yeah.
point would like to raise ducks, and I'm wondering if I'm going to have a crisis at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's talk about
hmm
let's start a little outside the animals that you raise, and let's talk about in the context that you're in at
Mhm.
growing grapes. Do you have you must have to have deer fencing around
Yes.
your vineyards?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Given our location, we would never get a vineyard started here if it was not deer fenced. In
right.
fact,
So you have 8-foot fences around everything.
correct. Yeah. In fact,
Okay,
I remember hearing a story from my neighbors when they first planted their vineyard. I think in the late '80s, and they had a portion that was not fenced yet. And a herd of elk came in, and literally they just walked down the rows, and all of the newly planted vines, they just walked down rows and just pulled them all out. Just thousands and thousands and thousands of vines. They
oh
just pulled them
my
out of the
god.
ground. They weren't eating them. They were just, it was like they were just, saying, nope, this is not going to be a vineyard. And it was a major, major setback because I think they came in
Oh,
and did it
that's
like
heartbreaking.
in the end of June. So yeah,
Oh man.
it is deer fenced, and then yeah,
And then do you have other predators to worry about
hmm
in relation to the birds, especially, and
yes,
the sheep?
yes, absolutely. We have, I mean, when it comes to predators, we have all of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Our main the predator that has the highest impact on us here are mountain lion, and we have
Okay.
the big cats are around here all the time. So we have mountain lion, black bear, coyote, fox, and then eagles, hawks, everything. Um,
Yeah.
and this system absolutely just did not work for the first few years that I was trying to implement it because we were just being predated out of the system.
Oh wow.
So we and it was just kind of a slow negotiation in my marriage between my wife Nikki and I to get livestock guardian dogs. So my wife
Got it.
is a dog fanatic. Kind of identifies herself as a dog in a way, and she just didn't like she was not comfortable with the idea of having a dog that doesn't come in the house, that lives outside 24/7 with the livestock. And we finally got to the point where we kind of talked through that, and we visited a few working dogs. And the second that she gave me permission, like I was in my truck driving to Idaho to go pick up a pair of dogs, and that moment was like we flipped a light switch. I mean, we have had.
Wow.
I mean, there was the year before we brought our first pair of dogs in, we lost 38 sheep. Really, in only about a 6-month period, we lost 38 sheep.
Wow.
And in the last, I think now it's been close to 14 years, we lost a goat last summer on day 2 of having goats. And we've lost one ewe that was actually in a pasture for only a few days that didn't have a dog with it. So
Uh,
we've had 2 losses in all the years since we've brought the dogs on board. So it's
wow.
an incredibly elegant and perfect solution. I like I
Okay.
and it fits our philosophy. I
Yeah.
don't I don't farm to be at odds with nature. Like those
Yeah.
predators belong here. They're important
Yeah.
to the balance of the ecosystem. Like we need them here, and being at odds with them is a huge bummer. So,
Yeah.
the dogs provide the space for us to actually farm inside our own ethics.
So this is two. Do you just have 2
Oh
dogs
no.
now?
Oh no.
Oh, okay.
There are gosh, oh my
Is it
god.
like 2 per herd,
There are
Yeah,
basically?
10
yeah,
there are
exactly.
10 dogs total.
Yeah, 10 dogs
Okay.
total on the
Got it.
property. Two of them are just my useless family dogs, and then there are 8. There are currently, well, I'm going to say 7.25 working dogs on the farm.
There's
Uh,
one lazy one.
he's just old, so he's one of my
Oh,
original
okay.
2, Mike. So Mike right now is just behind me at the tasting room, guarding the kind of ornamental chicken herd that's here for guests to kind of enjoy when they're here, or chicken herd, the chicken
Okay.
flock. So he's only guarding about 15 chickens that's
Okay.
that's about. And he's coming up on, I think he's 14ish, somewhere around there,
Oh, wow.
14 and a half years old, and he looks it. So he's a
So for anybody
beautiful.
who so for anybody who wants to do this, I think, especially if you're in an area that is, biodiverse and you're not surrounded by, urban centers or things like that, you're going to need dogs, it sounds like.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
deer fence, and then within the deer fence, so you're doing high intensity managed grazing,
Hmm.
I imagine, and
Yes.
that means a lot of movements within smaller, from smaller sections to smaller sections. Are you
Mhm.
using like the portable electric fence to sort of section off blocks within the deer fence then?
We did for years, and now very small portions of it are portable. But what we found, I am still after, I think we're coming up on our 16th year of developing this system, and it is finally just in the last 3 or 4 years starting to get to something that doesn't always constantly feel like the wheels are about to come off.
Mm,
For years, for at least a decade, I always felt like I was riding this edge of, like, gosh, this thing is just about to spin out of control, or it would spin out of control, because there is no, there's no model for this. Like, we're just making this up as we go along. Um, so so now what we've done just in the last couple of years is, I used to kind of adjust the paddock size for the amount of animals and the time of the year, because maybe we're moving every 2 or 3 days, maybe we're moving every 10 days. It depends on the conditions and how things are growing, and temperature and rainfall and all of these things. That's the art and the nuance in this thing. Um, now what we do is we just change the rotation intervals to match the conditions, and we have set paddock sizes.
got it.
So we've installed kind of semi-permanent sectioning fences into the trellis system,
Got it.
at
Okay.
set intervals in the vineyard, and then all we have to do is set up and break down the portable fences on the headlands, and the turnaround spaces at the ends of the row. And we actually even have those kind of installed onto the deer fence, and they're just rolled up and they hang on the fence. And then when we want to close off a paddock size, we can just unroll those, snap them into place, and they're good to
Yeah.
go.
So you're saying like a vineyard row itself becomes a fence row in
Correct.
a
Yeah.
way, like it
So
becomes a border to a paddock.
right, yeah. If you picture the trellis wires that are up higher in the canopy, and then you just come down lower on those trellis posts, and we've got insulators, and then we've run multi-strand wire that's just permanently installed on the lower part of the trellis post, and then you're just
Now,
connecting in to close off the headlands.
is but I imagine it's not continually electrified.
No, correct. Yeah. So
You know?
then,
Okay.
right. So then we have
Be fun during harvest. I mean,
right. Yeah, absolutely. And so we have a supply line that's buried, that then daylights at the end of every row. So you come up at every row, there's a
ah,
connection, and then we just connect the rows that we want to be energized. And then our
got it.
charger, we've got a big mother of a charger, because it's a lot of mileage of wire. Even if you're just doing, 1 acre of the vineyard, that's going to be about 4 miles of wire. And these
Wow.
chargers
Yeah.
always say, like, oh, this is an 80-mile charger, and it's always nonsense. Like, a mile of wire is a lot of wire to have it be adequately hot to,
Okay.
to to run the system. So we have a really big charger that's on a base that has wheels. So everything here, the idea is everything moves. Animal housing, everything is portable, light. One person should be able to move it. So it's on wheels, and then it's got a big solar panel on it. So we just move it, and then we've got a grounding wire and grounding rods at intervals all around in our deer fence. So then we can hook into a grounding line for the unit wherever we are.
Oh,
Yeah,
got it.
yeah.
And how long did it take you to figure this system out?
Well, I mean, a lot of those improvements were just made last year. So,
Okay.
I
All
mean,
right.
and
Realistic for anyone. Look at
yeah,
that. You just saved somebody 14 years or more.
yeah, I mean,
Like,
that is one of the things when people, we get a fair amount of people that contact us and say like, hey, how do we do this? We want to, can you do some consulting or things like that? And sometimes people are like, well, we'll figure it out. And I go, and you can, but there are a
right.
lot of holes to fall in, and I like to think
Yeah.
that I'm getting to the point where I've fallen into most of them, and then slowly dug
Don't need
myself
to do it
out.
again.
Yeah, but
Right.
it's and that's one of the things. If I was starting over again, I would have just made I went the route of like, oh, you use really short sheep and they can't reach the vines. That doesn't work. There's all these kinds of things that you kind of hear and you try and just through trial and error you figure out like, okay, this is how it works.
S-
So it's
Well,
relatively smooth now.
okay. Before we move on to some of those, specific animal details, any
Mhm.
other infrastructure things? I mean, I imagine having water and moving water is
Mhm.
difficult. Do
Yeah,
you? I mean,
yeah.
is that a tractor job? I mean, is that just something you need a tractor to be able to sort of schlep something around, or do you have a way to like pipe water around
Uh,
throughout
for
all the
for
areas?
years, it was go to the site with buckets or 5 gallon jugs and make a few
Okay.
trips back and forth and replenish water. So in
Right.
the last couple of years, we have also plumbed in finally, and a lot of this was just sort of logistical, like how do we get water to that site?
Right.
Because it's a long ways away from all the other infrastructure on the farm, and
Right.
so we finally, in the last couple of years, have plumbed in water, and now we have outlets every 100 feet, so that a 50-foot hose can do 100%
Okay.
coverage. So that you can also do things like move your water trough a little bit every day, so you don't get that like intensity of wear and tear in one place from everybody coming to the watering hole. Um,
Right. Right.
so we have water plumbed in, and then you have the trellis system itself that allows you to graze a vineyard year round with sheep without the sheep killing the vines. Um,
And oh, well, yes. So
right.
that's what I was definitely interested in hearing about.
Mhm.
So how does that work? I mean, I'm yeah, because you have the sheep in
Mhm.
not through Verizon, I imagine, or through Verizon.
No, I mean, we actually have pushed it quite a bit, and I've always been scared, but then sometimes because I don't hit the schedule quite how I'd like to, we push and learn that like, oh, okay, well, it was fine. I mean, our current way that we want to go about it is to have everybody out of the pool by the time we start, accumulating sugar and seeing color. Um,
Yeah.
but we have gone over, and it has been fine as long as the system is dialed in and working really well. So there's a trellis system, a series of electrical wires that again is another one of the things that's kind of the nuance and the art of the thing, because there's this whole, a lot of times people just say when they're thinking this, they go like, oh, we'll just raise the head height of the plant up to where the sheep can't reach it. Well, even with incredibly small sheep, that's really really high. And then you start thinking about the limitations of your how high can your crew work, to do
Right.
hedging or move catch wires or do shoot positioning and things like that. And then you have to
Right.
consider
Like
the
a
needs.
10-foot trellis becomes kind of the reality where you're like you start at 6 feet and then the shoots go up from that and you're like, wait a
Right.
minute. Yeah.
Exactly. So you
We'd
have to
all be
consider.
on Italian old school Italian pergolas.
Right.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
So you have to consider the limitations that the humans can work at, and then how high, sheep would really like up standing on their rear legs. How high can they reach? And then considering the needs of the vines, and that you need a certain amount of canopy to be able to ripen your fruit and have healthy vines. So you start putting all that equation together. You start working with, what's my breeding program with my sheep? What are the specific breeds we're choosing? And then inside of that breed, how are we trying to direct our genetics over time to make them fit even better? Um, but then in the end, what we've come up with is a trellising system that has essentially 4 wires, and the system is adjustable, so you can slide the insulators and the posts that the insulators themselves sit on back and forth, because the vines are not static. And
Right.
and so it's not like you can just set this thing and forget it. So if it needs to be said, this is an incredibly labor intensive way of growing wine. Like I am confident that we have the most expensive farming costs in the wine industry worldwide. Like I don't know that, but if you take real estate costs out of the equation, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's true.
So what height are the grapes growing at then with the system?
In relation to like the head height or the top of the canopy?
It's like from off the ground, like where do
Yeah.
do you, I mean,
So our head height is hanging right around about 31 inches.
okay,
So
so that's
it's
pretty normal. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, originally I think I began with the vineyard at about I think it was at more like 25, 26 inches, somewhere in there. And then over time, as I slow walked into the system, we did raise our head height a little, just to accommodate a reasonable shoulder height of a sheep. And then you're
So
up.
they can walk under it?
Yeah. So they
Oh,
walk
okay.
underneath it. So and
Got
that's,
it.
occasionally we get a ewe lamb that we decide we're going to keep for breeding, and then she ends up growing a little taller than we like, and then they get culled out of the program. But we're generally trying to have the backs, the butts and the shoulders of our sheep hit about 29 inches for our system. So,
Huh.
and same
Now,
thing with our dogs.
how that's awesome. Really? The dogs are that small?
Yeah, so
No,
we raise
they're
a
not.
smaller.
The
They're
males. The
not small.
males. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
not. No,
Okay,
they've
got
had to
it.
learn a little more for sure.
Yeah, and luckily
Got
they're a
it.
little smarter than the sheep, so they learn to
Right.
navigate it pretty quickly. But like we aren't running the massive, like Spanish Mastiff guardian dogs. We're doing Italian Maremas, and they are a smaller, lighter breed of guardian dog. But they
Okay.
have had to learn their way around the system. So.
And so are you saying, 'cause I'm just trying to understand this.
Mhm.
There's an electric wire that runs just above that height of the sheep so that they sort of get trained
Mhm.
to go under it, but not to touch it and not to touch anything above it?
Yeah, so if you picture our head height is right around 30, 31 inches. So just, right there at like 30, 31, there's the lower set of wires. So sitting
Got it.
just like right at head height, and then we try to have that in as tight as we can to the head without shorting out on the plant. And then
Right.
we're trying to come up, and we come up then about another 8 inches, and then we're trying to be out as wide as we can. Um, and so then it becomes a
Okay.
matter of also factoring in your equipment width, and then we're also, Katahdin and Dorper sheep both have kind of larger ears. Like that's a consideration when you're selecting your sheep. You're looking for something that, as kind of sad and mean as this sounds initially, you want bigger ears and things like that, so that they will, if they start
Get
trying to forage
shocked.
on those vines, that they'll encounter those wires and
Right.
learn that that's not where the food is. So
Got it. Okay.
yeah.
Got it.
So
So wow.
PETA, come at
With
us.
yeah, this has
We're
been one
asking
of those
for it, right?
discussions.
Yeah, right.
Um, I mean, I hope everyone knows this is a reality of living in the world and living with animals on a farm.
Right.
But I am curious. Without that, what would you have to do? I mean, because I imagine you didn't, like you said, some of this is a recent, you know, uh, installation. So
Right.
was it a part time of the year? Did you have to stay in the vineyard with them and sort of smack them on the nose if they started
Yeah.
eating? Like, what was the solution when, like, especially I imagine, there's a time where you can let them in, and then
Hmm.
but then there are times where it's real sensitive. Where you don't want them to eat all the shoots, or you'll have no fruit at the end of the year. You don't want them to eat too much of the leaves. Anyway, so
Right.
yeah, how
Yeah. So for years I was doing a method called aversion training, where you introduce grapevines to the sheep, sort of in like right around the same time where you're doing shoot thinning, and let
uh,
them eat the grapevines, and then you give them a dose that gives them a stomach ache, essentially, and that dose has no sort of flavor or odor to it, and so they
got it.
associate that stomach ache with the grapevines. And what I found is that it it's an incredibly hard method to maintain efficacy with. That over time,
Got it.
there's such a social element to the way that uh, ovines go about their diet. Um, so all it takes is one sheep nibbling on a leaf after that test and not having that reaction, and then they go, "Huh, wait a second," and then they try it again, and then someone else sees it, and
Right.
they start mirroring that behavior, and then the wheels come off. And with each
Right.
generation, it just sort of slowly gets like it works really well for a year, and then in year two it doesn't work quite so well, and by year three, like
Right.
the wheels start coming off. So I actually started moving to this electrified system several years ago. It's just now that the sort of, so for a while we actually had a mobile system on little wind up reels, and we moved it, and it was, so we had two setups for 1 acre, and I mean, you talk about a logistical nightmare. Like, it worked, but it was
Wow.
so hard to move, and it was so much labor. Uh, but I also didn't like, I just financially could not bite off installing a permanent system. So we just, for a while it was, okay, we're just going to sweat our way. This is what we need to do. We know this works. We're going to sweat our way through it until we got to a place financially where we could install the system that we have now.
Wild. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and I mean, I know that there are like you said, there are the high cordon training trellises
Hmm.
where you get up above like 50 inches, and then
Hmm.
but then I mean, you're either you have the draping
Hmm.
canes,
Hmm.
which the sheep can eat because
Right.
they're hanging down. I mean, they might
Yeah.
not get to the fruit,
Yeah.
but they're going to be you're not going to have much cane length,
Right.
or you're trying to train them up, which is impossible, like we said, because you're getting up to like 10 feet then, with a
Yeah.
trellis, or you just do the pergola style, and maybe that's, I mean, maybe, look, the
Yeah.
Italians did it for a long time, and maybe
Right.
that's why. So
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
I've
you know
I've seen those systems in action, and it has never really looked to me like something that I wanted to pursue, because with like a single hanging wire trellis or something like that, what you would see is that sheep would just grab canes, and so now you're getting broken canes, so you're getting like
right,
a canopy that becomes incredibly hard to manage if you're trying to do high quality wines, because you get different cane lengths out in the vineyard, breaking. But even if you're getting up really high with your head height and still going upward, a sheep, even a small sheep, they'll stand up on their hind ends, they'll go up and they'll put their front feet up on the wires, and brace
right,
themselves and eat. Like, they're pretty resourceful, and even like little pudgy, cute baby doll Southdown sheep. Like, they can get up a lot higher. I've seen them, because that's where I've started. I've seen them walk around on their hind legs and grab cans. Um,
right.
so all of those things make your canopy management
So,
a
all
nightmare.
right. So I'm gonna
Hmm.
just to go over this. So you're putting you're sectioning off a block with
Hmm.
like a fence that you have installed on the deer fence, and then
Hmm.
you're essentially turning on the wires in that block
Hmm.
while the sheep are in there, and the
Correct.
pigs.
Yeah.
Now picture, and so that's a little transition
Hmm.
to the pigs, because in your a couple questions about that. I see pictures that you guys have online of the sheep and the pigs together, and I'm
Hmm.
curious if there's any pros and cons of that. But also, pigs represent their own
Hmm.
difficulties in that they like to dig and
Hmm.
root up and will easily, sort of damage roots, shallow
Hmm.
roots of vines, especially if a vine isn't well established. If you're talking,
Hmm.
younger vines, it's
Right.
a real sensitive thing to bring sheep into a vineyard.
Hmm.
So do the kunis, because I know they're shorter nose, they don't
Hmm.
maybe root as deeply. Is that
Hmm.
part of why you use them?
Yeah.
Or how do you manage the pigs and the sheep together?
Yeah. Absolutely. I am a huge fan for a lot of reasons of kune pigs. Um, they tend to do, not they tend to, during the growing season they they do almost no rooting. So as long as
Oh,
they'll start rooting when they feel like they need to look for food. But if they're getting, if there's enough protein in the grass out there, that one of the things about these pigs is they are probably the most grazing prone breed of pig that there is.
oh,
And
wow.
and
Okay.
what we have found is that we actually, in sort of the peak of spring, early summer, need to limit their grass intake because they will actually get over fat just on grass. Like they can get so fat that their faces close up and they can't see, because they get like fat rolls around their eyes.
Now,
So
are you seeding cover crops that
no.
provide certain nutrients for them? No, it's just
No,
whatever reseeds itself.
a huge underpinning of this philosophy is as reduced or no tillage, which we'll get into hopefully down the line here a bit in this conversation. But that's more about, like, fostering a specific microbial population to the vineyard.
Yeah.
Um,
No, but
so,
even with the no-till, I didn't know if
mhm.
you were scattering, alfalfa or anything out there just to make sure that they had,
Yeah.
something, various nutrient needs were
Yeah,
being
no,
met by the.
like, the idea again being to really pursue the most truthful and natural terroir that we have here. So it was important to me. We used to do, tillage, work everything up, eliminate everything that's there, drill a cover crop, and then mow it down and incorporate it. Back when I was doing, what I kind of call conventional organics. Um,
Right.
uh, Now my thinking has changed more to say, like, look, if we are really pursuing the truth of this place, then we need to allow the vineyard's floor to just slowly revert back to, um, native, native flora, or at least
Mm.
what adapts. Like, I'm not trying to say that we haven't changed this place. We've changed it profoundly by introducing all these animals. But what we have done is kind of set up this self-sustaining ecosystem, and then saying again, like, whatever thrives here under these conditions, that is what we want. And we don't want to bring in things that, like doing a cover crop requires us to go out and eliminate the other competition, and bring something from some other place in the valley, and then drill that crop in, and it requires special outside care for its particular needs in order to thrive.
Right.
We have to
Right.
take away the things that belong here. um,
Right.
so so to kind of have like an overarching view of what the system looks like,
Yeah, please.
it
Probably should
depends.
have
It
started there.
depends on the time of the year. Like, sometimes the
Okay.
pigs are with the sheep, sometimes they're leading. But normally, what the system really looks like is we have pigs leading the procession, uh, and they're just kind of, and part of that is we don't quite have our numbers where we want to yet with the pig program, but they're leading the grazing, and they're kind of creaming things over and taking the clover and all the kind of, they're getting the Oreos and Doritos out of the way, and then coming behind that are the sheep and the geese working together. So the sheep and the
Got
geese are 100% from cradle to processing, 100% grass-fed animals here on the farm. So they have zero outside inputs going into them. And then coming behind that, we have our poultry, which kind of acts as like a sanitation crew. So they go through, and what they're doing is ideally we're moving pigs and sheep ahead of uh, the hatching periods for parasites that will be hatching out in their manure. So then the
Right.
chickens are coming back through and scratching that manure all over, exposing those parasites to sunlight, to rainfall, but also literally like eating the larvae and eating the eggs and cleaning things
Right.
up for the next pass.
Right.
And at the same time, they'll scratch out. Sometimes we'll go around and throw scratch grain in places where we're like, oh, we want to eliminate some competition on the vines here, things like that. And so the chickens will target those weeds and eliminate them for us.
Now, I mean, chickens I find to be super destructive to grasslands as well. I mean,
Correct.
we don't have a yard thanks to our
Yeah.
chickens.
Yeah.
I, I imagine if they're given enough space, it's probably limited in
Mhm.
the kind of damage that they can do because they're moving around so much. But
Yeah.
is that the case? I mean, do you have any problems with them, concerns?
No, I mean, the key again is movement, movement, movement. That is
Right.
movement is what keeps everything healthy and allows things to, like we don't use wormers. We don't even, we don't vaccinate our sheep or our pigs for anything. I haven't done it for more than 10 years. We put no
Right.
medications into our animals. Um,
And just to be
again,
clear, that only applies to the animals. The
Yeah,
rest
that's
of
true.
us,
Yeah, Antiquum Farm is fully vaccinated. So,
the
Humans
the
are.
humans are cool.
yeah. But
But you also aren't eating the larva out of your
yeah,
chickens,
that
out of
is
your
true.
sheep's poop.
We also
So
try to not eat the larvae. Correct. But yeah, we haven't done. I don't think we've done any vaccinations for more than a decade at least, and that again is attributed to always staying ahead of pests and not coming back to any piece of ground inside of those kind of hatching incubation periods for.
and isn't there like a 30-day window or more for bacteria, like sort of harmful bacteria, that as long as you don't revisit that piece of land again, that basically all of the bacteria that would be in the droppings of the animals will have basically resubsumed into the soil and been taken over by the normal soil microbiome and be safe again.
Yes,
Do you know about?
yes, for the most part. I mean, there are some
Okay.
parasites that can live an incredibly long time and just sit dormant,
Okay.
and there are also certain certain viruses and things that you can get into your soils that, like, once they're there, they're there. So I think
Got it.
that's, think about it like with overuse of antibiotics in our food chain or in medicine with people. It's not that you are trying to create an environment where there is no virus or no parasites. It's that you're trying to foster a population that can deal with what you have.
Right.
And at the same time, use good management tools to to stay to keep those loads as low as possible. But, like, I don't ever for a second, you actually don't want sheep who have no parasites, because then when they do get them, which they will get them, uh, then they die. And that
Right.
was, I 2 years ago, I had a neighbor that had some sheep that I just really liked the look of, and honestly, like, it was my kids going like, their sheep are so much cuter than ours, and I was like, yeah, ours are ugly, but they're hardy and they're delicious. And we had this argument for years, and so finally one year I was talking to the neighbor, and he's like, yeah, I got this ram. If you want to buy him, like, try him out, and I bought him, and he came to our farm, and, like, he just got immediately, when he came onto our place, like, he'd been babied in a program, for years. He'd been wormed every 2 or 3 months, and, vaccinated for this and vaccinated for that. And he just perished like in short
Yeah.
order. It was crazy.
Wow.
I hadn't, and I just hadn't experienced anything like that for so long.
Yeah. It's like the
he
War of the Worlds.
yeah, it's kind of
That
that, like with children, like with raising children, where they say, "Prepare your kid for the road, not the road for your kid."
right.
This particular ram had his road paved a little too much for
Got it.
him, right? So,
And
yeah.
and yeah, sorry. Okay, so you have the pigs quickly followed by the sheep, quickly followed by the sheep and geese, followed
Mhm.
by the chickens. Does
Mhm.
anything else come in? Do the ducks come into play at any point, or are they
No,
sort
so
of
I don't I kind of tend to discount the ducks because
okay?
they're just there for amusement and personality.
Show
But
ducks,
yeah, they're show
right?
ducks. They're top tier show ducks. They are just worked in with, I kind of consider the waterfowl to be a unit. So the ducks and the geese will
Got it.
typically be there with the sheep, with the exception of in the wintertime. And then when we're hatching. And the other important part of this is to consider the resources of the farm and the way that changes with the seasons. And
Mm,
this is one of the
yeah,
reasons that we really quickly moved to really becoming a fully functioning farm and having lambing and hatching out geese, and that your numbers need to change to reflect the availability of the resources on the farm. Like, we cannot
uh,
have in February the numbers that we have in June, and
got it.
and vice versa. Because if we have the numbers that we have in midwinter in June, then we are not actually uh, utilizing the full potential to use solar energy to generate organic matter and capture and store carbon in the soil, which gets us into the kind of why we're doing this, to like create this microbial hum that actually changes and feeds the personality of the wines. Like that's where this actually really starts getting interesting. Like, the system itself is fun and it's interesting and it's cool work, but like how it comes into effect, the fruit and the wines, is where it actually goes like, oh, so that's why you do this at all. um, so that is the idea, is to rotate through the site, multiple times. I mean, we probably do about 12 rotations a year through the sites, with all of these animals, and they all affect it in a different way. and
Hmm.
and each time that we're grazing and reducing above ground biomass, we're creating die off of the root mass, as that root mass with each grazing recedes to match that reduction of biomass above ground, which really affects the microbial population in the soil
Yeah,
as it adapts.
amazing. I can't imagine. I mean, I can imagine a little bit. That sounds incredible. But it sounds like I mean, I just want to underline some of the big challenges that somebody doing this would face
Hmm.
isn't so much about, the animal specific care, but the infrastructure
Hmm.
behind that care and
Hmm.
how to actually incorporate them into the vineyard where you're not harming the animal or harming the vineyard or whatever the perennial that you're putting them into.
Hmm.
So that a big thing for somebody thinking about doing this is just that infrastructure and everything that's involved in that. And you've really highlighted some of those really important things. I want to just back to the kunis for a minute.
Hmm.
Those
Hmm.
are tend to be smaller. Is that
Hmm.
they tend to be a smaller pig? They also are slower growing than
Hmm.
some of the commercial breeds that you might find
Yeah.
otherwise people using, just because you could have a huge pig in 6 months with a commercial breed, and I think
Right.
kunis are more like a year,
Right.
like 10 months to 12 months, something like that, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
um and but that fits your plan. I mean, that's
Hmm.
that's okay with you, especially because of the way that they interact with the soil and the vineyard, and that they're such good grazers, and
Hmm.
their size and everything else. It sounds like their personality is pretty nice too. They're pretty sweet pigs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we tend to, with all of our livestock, and raising proteins on the farm, a part of the philosophy is to raise things slower. I
Mm,
think that it's healthier for the animals. They have a better life. You have less complications. I also think that you get a better product. You get some.
mm,
It's just like growing wine. A longer, slower, cooler growing season. If you can get to peak ripeness more slowly, as opposed to, gee, we hit 24% sugar in August, and why does the wine suck? It is the same way with a chicken. It's the same way with lamb, and I believe it's the same way with pork. Growing
hmm.
things quickly, I think makes weird texture and a lot of fat and things that are not all that delicious.
Mm.
So with the pork,
I like fat.
well, I do too. I'm not saying fat is evil. I'm just saying that you get like better yellow delicious fat, and
Got it.
and the,
Okay.
and things just have more complexity and intensity and flavor. Um,
Thank
like
you for clarifying that.
so what I've moved to with the pigs, and I think that 99.9% of anyone that raises pork is gonna want to call BS on this, but like what I've come around to with the kunis is that actually feeding them at all past maybe the first 3 months of their life, um, actually leads to health complications. And what we've moved to
Mm,
now, and really actually seems to be working, is allow them to graze through the growing season. And then as things dry out, now we have, apples starting to fall off of trees and acorns falling off. So putting them into orchards, putting them into oak groves. And then now through the winter, we have them up in the forest, in land. They're working with our goats to help, kind of reduce fire risk in some areas. And we have not fed those pigs at all, and they look great. Like they're growing, they're healthy, they're vigorous, and we are raising what is considered to be the most sort of input intensive livestock animal without actually putting any feed to them at all, and they're thriving. So it's a breed of pig that I really believe in
wow.
them. The trade off is they're half the size.
Right.
Instead of
A
butchering a 200.
300 pound.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a 220, 250 pound thing at 6 months. It's going to be 125, 150 at 12 to 14 months. So the
Got it.
idea is we'll take them through the forest during the winter and let them help clear out blackberries and Scotch broom and all these
Mm.
invasive non-native nasties, and let them forage through the winter, and then we'll finish them out on spring grass just the same as we're finishing lamb.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah,
And a beautiful system. I mean, so much there. I know that you're using the goats to help, create fire breaks as well.
hmm
I imagine goats would be the one thing you would tell people not to put in your vineyard.
correct. Yeah, that would be
They
that
can
would
get
be a
on top
big
of anything, right?
yeah, that would be a big
They could climb
mistake.
that 10-foot trellis. They could climb the pergola even if we built it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, they're foragers, and they're browsers, and they would it would be impossible. I think it would be impossible to keep them out of the vines. But we've
but
found
but
a sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. But still, still very helpful around the farm, especially if you're living in on the West Coast, where we are now. Fire season is a real thing, like we were talking about, and
Yeah,
it's a regular thing now. It's not just a once in a while. Like we need to start, implementing these solutions, like these goats, to get rid of some of that fire fuel in the
right.
forests and
Yeah.
and create breaks for us.
Yeah,
Um,
on a small family farm like ours, with limited, admittedly limited capital, sometimes it takes a while for plans to come to full fruition. And goats have been part of our plan for some time, but at the same time, given our location, given our specific predator load, we could never do this without a really big pack of big active dogs to keep the goats safe. So there was
Right.
kind of this entire sequence of events that had to fall into line, and not the least of which was, again, that sort of marital negotiation process of, are we going to have puppies? And which we finally did, and then, we had 12 beautiful puppies, and most of them have moved on to other farms and have fantastic careers and lives. And and that was that process of preparing those dogs to go out, and handing off dogs that were extremely well prepared and bonded to livestock, was one of the most rewarding things I've done in my working life. But we retained several of the puppies out of the litter in order for us to round out this program, and then we went out and got our goats, and that program has been, it's new for us, but the impact has been amazing, and the difference in our property in areas that for gosh, 2 decades now, I walk by and I'm like, oh man, I really, like, it bothers me that it looks like that, and that these blackberries are just taking this over. And I mean, we've already moved through, I'm going to say, uh, 8 or 9 acres that they've just absolutely transformed. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's
Fantastic.
fun. I mean, we have a lot of ground still left to cover, and we'll have to keep rotating back through. We need a lot
You'll
more
have an
goats to do everything we want to
Yeah, I
do,
was
but
gonna say.
and
Um,
what's really cool to see too is what happens with wildlife after that. Because when you have a forest that's just choked with blackberries and non-native species, like, mice and squirrels and little birds and stuff can use it, but like, it's not fully available to like the full array of the fauna for the area. And you go back through, and you do this thing that maybe initially appears to be kind of unnatural and invasive, but then once they rotate out and it begins to recover, you start seeing all the other animals moving back in and using the area, and you just get so much more diversity. It's really cool.
yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I mean, what we were talking about was a lot of this incredible farming and the infrastructure behind it, and the you know sort of this whole ecosystem that you've created. And what you, I think, want to talk about is what does that add up to in the soil, which then translates into the wine. Am I asking
Yeah,
the right
yeah,
question
correct.
there?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, two of the most powerful things that we've done, some of the most meaningful steps that we've taken in this system, uh, have been actually to remove two things that are sort of underpinnings of most sustainable agriculture. And that is the elimination of a cover cropping system, and then also getting away from fertilization of any kind. Um, when I think about uh, agriculture in general, or whether we're talking about conventional or organic or biodynamic, um, I I think that there are some areas where maybe we are looking at things through the wrong lens. The first would be with cover cropping. My experience here on the farm has been that every the conventional thinking with cover cropping is, you grow this giant biomass crop, let it come up almost to maturity, normally what they kind of call boot stage, where it's just about to flower, it's just setting flowers, depending on the timing that you need for the crop that you're trying to grow. And then you mow it down, and then in most cases, then you till it into the soil, so you're trying to take all that organic matter that you've generated, and incorporate it into the soil. And the thinking
Hmm.
is that you're mining nutrients from deep in the soil with the root system, and then breaking that up, and then working that back into the soil. um, there's a couple things that happen when you do that. So as you till the soil, you get this injection of oxygen into the soil. So when people are talking about the benefits with these systems, they'll say, well, it stimulates the microbes in the soil, and you get this, this kick of organic matter and nutrients that happen in the soil. And all that is true. But when you look a little deeper and you look further down the road, what you'll actually see is you get this spike of microbial action that happens from that burst of oxygen that you've sort of artificially introduced into the soil. And that spike of microbial activity will really quickly burn up all of that organic matter. So you get this burst of nutrition in the soil, and this burst of microbial activity. But then, like in any population where things surge, you'll get a crash. And so when I say that I think we're looking at cover cropping possibly through the wrong lens, we kind of changed the way that we were looking at it more in the sense of that the above ground biomass, so the part of the plant that you see, is really just kind of, for us, it's like the bonus material. Using that as forage and passing that through the digestive system of animals. So thinking about a farm almost more like in terms of gut health and like having diverse microfauna that have the potential to change the microbial culture of a place. So you think about all those digestive enzymes and everything that's happening, and sheep have 4 stomachs, and when they belch, it smells beautiful. It smells to me like fertility.
I've never had the pleasure of smelling a sheep belch.
Oh yeah, no,
Sheep burp.
you gotta milk a sheep, and then they'll turn around, they'll burp in your face, and it's beautiful. It smells so it's fermentation, and it smells fertile, and so we think of that as almost like inoculant material. And the same thing for any of the animals that we're using in the vineyard. So chickens and pigs, and so all of that diversity of animal life in the place is building up the microbial complexity of the place. But moreover, what's happening is when you think about the biomass of that cover crop, what we're really looking at is the root mass of those cover crops. So every time that we graze, what happens is, as you reduce that above ground biomass, you get a die-off of the root mass underground. And so now what happens is you do get an introduction of oxygen as that root mass sort of begins to decay. So
Right.
the soil gets sort of reopened and gets channelized, but it's in a much more natural and sustainable, a less intrusive way. There isn't this sort of violent injection of oxygen. What also is happening as that root mass is dying off, that begins to stimulate the microbial life. But at the same time, what's happening is, so we've grazed that off, that root mass is dying off, but at the same time, the above ground biomass is now recovering and growing back. So as long as we don't come back and overgraze and come back to that piece of ground too quickly, we need to allow it to have time to breathe and rest and then recover. And so now that root mass is rebuilding. And so you're thinking about that, we're rotating through the site, 12, 13, maybe, in some years 17 times in the year. So you think of all those cycles of the sort of the soil breathing in and out with that root mass as it rebuilds and then dies off and rebuilds and dies off. And so you're building this sustained kind of buzz of microbial action in the soil. But at the same time, the other really powerful thing that we've done is we've eliminated all fertilization. So we stopped using organic fertilizers back in, what's it been now? I think 2007 was when we began weaning off, and we were completely off by 2010. And so if you think of now, what we're doing is we're setting up this ecosystem in the vineyard while also eliminating anything from outside of the vineyard fences. And so what begins to happen is now the microbial life, and the same thing where earlier we talked about, all the animals and everything on this farm, that we're selecting them over time to make sure that they can thrive on the resources that this property has to offer. The same thing is happening with the microbial life in our soils, in that they are able to get by on these resources. They're able to thrive on these resources. So over time, just by natural selection, um, sometimes I like to say, think about, like, take a bunch of teenagers and throw them out on an island somewhere, and leave them a bunch of, don't leave them condoms, and leave them a bunch of beer and some chips and salsa, and come back in 500 years. And, as long as they've made it, what you're going to find when you come back is a very distinct population of people that are adapted to live on that island. Right. So that is the way that I look at the microbial life in our vineyard. So as that's happening, and as it's happening in this vacuum without soluble fertilizers being added to the vineyard.
Can I ask you a question or two?
Sure.
Do you? I'm guessing you're composting. Do you use any compost as fertilizer in the vineyard?
We do not. We do not. So
it's all just the natural.
Yeah, I mean
the animals, the animal manure, and just the dieback and the litter of the ground cover of the whatever lives in the vineyard. That's it.
Yeah, I mean true. I mean, every now and then, you just read a little golden nugget that somebody has laid out there for you to discover. And I remember reading just in one of Elliot Coleman's gardening, vegetable gardening books, just the kind of phrase. I don't even remember exactly how he put it, but it was essentially just like he was thinking about compost piles, and was saying, like, if you can just skip the pile, skip the cow and let the earthworms be your cows. So that's sort of like, how do we skip this process? Because to me, building, for one, like, I have never actually seen a vineyard like the compost piles that I see at commercial biodynamic vineyards are, when you consider the amount of tonnage that is actually required to fuel a vineyard. This was kind of one of my founding thoughts as I was trying to figure out how to feed a vineyard in a truly self-contained way. And visiting these other biodynamic vineyards, organic vineyards, and seeing these compost piles that quite honestly wouldn't even fuel like a large community garden.
Right.
They aren't, they make us feel good, but I'm not sure that they really actually are impacting anything. I mean, you were talking about 15 to 20 to 25 tons per acre per year. I mean, you were talking about a Pentagon this size building of compost every year to fuel a medium-sized vineyard, right?
Right.
So
yeah, and I mean, it eliminates waste. There are good things. People should compost, but like the idea that you'll get all of your fertility from your on-farm compost pile might be a stretch.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this is not to like trash on methods. Like, I think that anybody that's trying to do things in a more sustainable way, like, those are all very positive steps. It's just like I was saying before, I still want to just keep advancing the discussion and trying to push the conversation around sustainability, and especially around terroir. I want to keep pushing those ideas forward. So we do compost. We compost for our vegetable garden, and we do a little bit of composting. If we have extra, we'll use it in our pastures. Yeah, go ahead.
one other question related to all of this. Are you tracking or measuring, uh, your soil nutrition, things like
Yes.
that? Do you know if you've built,
Yes.
nitrogen, like, do you see that? And I mean, does that translate into the wine, into yans that you have
Yes.
seen
Yeah.
increase?
Yeah. We
Okay.
do track this, because of course we need to, we need to know that this isn't all just like a beautiful idea.
Right.
I have no interest in doing something that's going to cause my vineyard to crash or cause my farm to crash. So there was a really interesting correlation into some of the into the ways that like the fruit and the wines shifted, and how that related to what we saw in our soil analysis. And that's that from that
Mm.
2007 to 2010 vintage period where I was weaning off of organic fertilizers. Um, what we did see, is in soil analysis and in tissue samples, um, we we saw this sort of initial downward trend in fertility, and we did see the vines get really kind of wonky and devigorated, and things got a little awkward. And 2010 honestly was the year where I was kind of starting to think about pulling the plug. Um, and but when we had bud break in 2010, uh, I noticed that suddenly the plants seemed to have dug in and settled in, and they looked healthy and happy. Um, and at the same time, we saw two things. We saw that the soil labs came back and still said that the soils were deficient. But when we started pulling tissue samples, everything looked balanced and beautiful.
Oh,
So,
wow.
which continues to this day, but now we're actually starting to see fertility in the last, I'm going to say the last 5 years. We're seeing actual like soluble, measurable fertility showing back up on soil analysis. And we're seeing things like,
Wow.
I have not limed my vineyard, I think, for 8 years. And like
Uh-huh.
calcium and magnesium are just dialed. It doesn't actually make sense, but it's
Wow.
happening. Um, so so
Do, One
yeah,
other question. What age were the vines when in 2007 when you started that transition?
2007 they'd be 8 years old at that point
Okay.
in time. Yeah.
Got it.
So which kind of leads me into talking about the way that we think about soil fertility. I think that that's another area where maybe we may be thinking about these things in a way that we should look at. When we're testing for soil fertility, they are measuring for soluble nutrients, and then the lab, based on the results, will make recommendations to replenish soluble nutrients. And what isn't being considered in that picture are the insoluble nutrients that are bound up in the soils. And in soils like these here in the southern Willamette Valley, I mean, there is an almost inexhaustible sea of insoluble nutrients.
Mm.
The reason why I think agricultural industry in general looks at soil nutrients this way is because there are so many things in the kind of conventional wide view agricultural model that take microbial action out of the picture. So tillage is whether you're organic or conventional or whatever you're doing, like tillage is almost sometimes in organic farming, like to come off of using herbicides, you're doing a lot more tillage to
Right.
reduce your competition for your crop. So agricultural tillage is one of the major factors in carbon release and global warming. So
Right.
everything that we can do to reduce tillage, this is not, by the way, I'm putting this in parentheses, this is not an argument to use herbicide. But anything that you can do to minimize or eliminate altogether tillage is a really positive step. And so what begins to happen in the vineyard is when you step out of having soluble fertilizers, which also kind of break the communication chain between microbes and plants, and you step away from tillage, as you begin to get these associations and communications that are happening between microbial culture and plant life. And so those microbes begin to colonize the root hairs of the vines and every other plant in the site,
Right.
for that matter. And they will break down the insoluble nutrients in the site and deliver that to the root hairs of the plant. And on its face, there's no benefit to the microbes for them doing that. They're getting nothing out of it. But what starts happening is this exchange begins to happen, where now the plants start kicking back carbohydrate reserves in their form of simple sugars, going back to the microbes. So the microbes are getting fed as they're feeding the vines. So you go back to that idea of like the kids on the island.
Right.
What you now have is this distinct, adapted, mutating, or evolving population of microbial culture that is entirely in charge of feeding your vines. So now we get into like, how does this affect the wines? And that's where it gets fascinating, because what we started seeing in 2010, as the vineyard sort of adapted and dug in and got comfortable with its new reality, as this new microbial population began to shift and take over, is the vines completely changed. The fruit changed, like in terms of chemical composition of the juice and the resulting wines. We had our Pinot Noir in 1 year. So up to the 2002 vintage, it looked like Pinot Noir. It was thin-skinned, pretty tight clusters for the most part everywhere, and the color of the fruit was that typical like purplish black. In 1 year, every single berry in the vineyard became just blueberry blue. Like it looks like Nebbiolo or Syrah. Like it's the wrong color for
Wild.
Pinot Noir. Yeah, it's wild. Probably 35 or 40% of the vines in that site, their physical growth habit changed. So up until that vintage, everything grew like Pinot Noir, meaning it was kind of floppy and hard to manage in the canopy. You know, it wants to fall out of the trellis constantly. And somewhere between 35 to 40% of the vines began growing like Riesling. They got this very like rigid, upright growth habit, and they became a dream to like do canopy management on.
Wow.
Yeah, our Vadensville block, the clusters all started. They begin the season. The flowers are hanging downward like normal Pinot Noir, and then as they flower, they stand up on their stems and they sit upside down, and they'll actually almost go all the way to harvest, sitting as inverted clusters. It's wild. It's completely
That's
wild.
amazing.
And it's not uncommon to see like little color variations and things like that in Pinot varietals. But in our Pinot Gris, in that same vintage, we started seeing kind of dual toned berries. So some clusters, Pinot Gris being kind of a light purple skin tone on the fruit. Some clusters, or sometimes the entire plant, became like Chardonnay or Pinot Blanc in color. But then we would also see clusters that were mixed. Sometimes you'll see berries that are like split right down the middle, all these weird like little fractal patterns on the berry. So like half of the berry is green and the other half, and we don't know what it is. And the other half is it looks like Pinot Gris. Some of it looks like Pinot Noir, like it looks more like Pinot Noir than our Pinot Noir. But it tastes like pineapples and mangoes. Like it's
Wild.
really cool. So as we started seeing that, and again, thinking about these microbial cultures in the site, it's not like you look at the site and say, it's all doing this one thing. So our Pinot Gris site is all one clone planted on one rootstock. But what we began to see were three totally different ripening and profiles and flavor profiles developing in the site. And what I have to think is happening there is that, sort of different microbial cultures are becoming dominant in different parts of the vineyard, based upon probably little subtle differences in soil and elevation and aspect and things like that. So it's,
Yeah.
it's a way of growing that requires going a lot slower, paying a lot more attention, being able to see what's presenting in front of us in real time.
Yeah. Or starting the vineyard that way. If you have, if, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know if there are some wise people who say we shouldn't be planting any more vineyards. There are plenty out there, and
Mm-hmm.
don't clear any more land for vineyards.
Right.
But if you were, like we're doing here at our house in Los Angeles, it's
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're taking any land away from
Right.
native landscape in our
Right.
backyard.
Uh-huh.
Just removing a lawn
Mm-hmm.
originally.
Right.
So but it's like I think we've seen that. Like I've been doing this podcast for a few years now, or 2.5 years, and talking about these things and learning about them, and meanwhile been executing that in with our little home vineyard. And it really is like this year. The fermentation was like the best fermentations I've smelled
Mm-hmm.
any time in my life. Like there is just a quality now that's happening that's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it's so, the exciting thing is you're like you said, you don't want it to just be something that you think and you hope, and that's sort of like, it sounds nice.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to be quantifiable too. Like this is, we're talking about solutions for big problems. And if it can't just be, well, it makes me feel good
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
that. It has to have like a measurable outcome. And it's just, so it's very exciting when you can see that happening. And what I was saying was the advantage for us was, we kind of had that knowledge as we were planting. And so as the vines are growing into their soil, they're already getting all of that, like they're not being tilled, they're having access to a microbial community that continues to feed and grow and cover crops and things like that continue to add to it and become an exponential fertility. And so by the time you start harvesting grapes at year 3, they're already in that zone where they're just like, woohoo,
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
their fun thing.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And that's the thing that we've absolutely seen as this has evolved, is that you kind of have to shrug off your expectations. I know that Andrew sees things all the time in the cellar that just defy all sort of academic expectations around winemaking, and you kind of have to just shrug your shoulders and go, well, I've never, you have to say, I've never read about this or heard about this. Is it expressive? Is it beautiful? Is it authentic to this place? And if it is, then it's good, and
Yeah.
so it's been a process of not to discount the work that has come before us at all, but to sort of layer it on as another experience, and just write a kind of a different chapter about you know finding the voice of a place through wine, and knowing that can lead to some really wonderful and unexpected places, if you just if you farm in a way that sort of breaks the chain of all the other materials that people have available to them, and just create something that is entirely your own.
Yeah. I feel like that gets at the essence. Like you keep talking about terroir, and I really think whatever name we give to that, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, if we aren't striving for that, like then it just becomes a commercial pursuit. It's
Yeah.
less
Yeah.
artistic or less meaningful to me personally. And honestly, the wines I want to try are the ones that are like yours.
Right. Yeah.
Regardless, it's not about a style of wine that I like. It's that foundational, where it comes from, where the intention behind it,
Yeah.
and that sense of uniqueness, whatever, however that's expressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really, I think that's at the soul of what I love about wine personally.
Absolutely.
So here's my question for you, which is going to sound a little strange, but how important actually is wine to all of this? Like, is it the highlight, or is it the reason for all of this? Or have you found that, I mean, like you said, you didn't really get into it as your reason for doing this. But I imagine it has a big impact on the wine. But, I'm just curious philosophically, how does wine fit in your mind in relation to everything that you're doing? But then also, how does it get affected by everything that you're doing?
Right. For me, if I am fully honest, I mean, I have come to care about wine um, because it is the thing that allows me to do the kind of work that I really want to do.
Yeah.
I see wine as this fantastic medium to deliver a larger message, and maybe to deliver a larger message to a segment of the population that has the potential to make the most impact. Meaning, some of our larger consumers on the planet.
Yeah.
And so I think it's powerful that way, but it's also powerful in that wine has this unique ability to articulate the voice of a place. And coming back to that, I farm here. I was born and raised in this area, only 4 miles away from this farm. And I have a profound sense of belonging and self-identity that is tied up in this place. So this is my home, and it is almost impossible for me at this point to sort of untangle my sense of self from this piece of land. So like it's kind of what I it's like what I have to offer. And so so wine's ability to communicate something clearly, and I don't think like all wine communicates clearly. It's the thing I always look for in wine is like, does this thing really actually have something clear and different to say? Or
Yeah.
is it just sort of a reflection of a varietal and a region and a vintage? I think there's sort of like another potential level to that communication. Um, so for that reason, wine has become important to me, because I think it has this ability to communicate some things that I feel are really important. Um, it also, it allows me to go out there and play with pigs, you know. Um, so that's what that's kind of what it means to me. I think it means a very different thing. Andrew has a different, like different headspace and mental capacity for wine than I do. He has one of those fantastic minds that is able to categorize and remember things and keep track of stuff. I'm not wired that way. So
well, I mean, if you're okay, speaking to that, and speaking to how you've seen the land,
mhm.
and the kind of farming that's happening there, Andrew, become a unique thing in the wine. Please, I would love to hear.
Yeah, it's there's a real sense, and I think that like the humans the limitation of sight is a very real perspective. We have to operate in ways that are above ground for most of us most of the time, and we take what we see, and we're often not thinking about all the things that we can't see, or what is hidden, or what might be alive. And in this context, what's alive in the soil and what's connective, how fungus and bacteria and all sorts of things, and insects and other creepy crawlies move through the ground that we walk on a regular basis. Like, it's not part of most of our daily life, and everything that Stephen is doing in terms of farming is to grow soil. It is growing what we cannot see, and it's nice to have a little bit of space to have kind of, not to confuse causation and correlation, but to know that life is going on, and that it is precious, and we want to protect it, and understanding that when we do that, particularly in a vineyard system, that as the vine root systems are colonized by all of these creatures and all of the things that are growing there, as long as we are not actively being an intermediary as humans in that life cycle of the vine and its growing cycle, it will do the work that we want it to do largely on its own. Now, that's mostly in terms of like water uptake and nutrient uptake, and how those things move through the plant are obviously regulated by the plant. We're not poking things in and trying to move through the xylem and phloem what we want, but then we are still obviously training the plant, and we're putting it on a trellis, and we're guiding that solar panel of the canopy straight up, so that particularly in the climate of northwestern Oregon, like, we need to maximize as much sunlight generally as we possibly can. And so getting those canopies structured. So it's not that it's without human interaction,
Right.
but we do want to see that piece of the life of the soil, and how the plant takes up its nutrients. So that, like, we don't spray foliar feeds, right? We're not coming through and being like, let's come in through the tractor and just spray a bunch of potassium into the canopy, and like make sure that when we take a petiole sample, that like, now it's got enough potassium, like we did it right, sort of thing. Like we're not interested in that. If the vine doesn't do it, then it doesn't need it, and we want to trust that plant is going to, in some sense, largely live and die of its own volition. And I think that it's in that ability of an individual plant, in an individual grapevine, to have its own microbiome and microbiological signature, that then it's in individual plants that are then in a vine row, or across the row from each other, that are planted in a certain area, that then it becomes a collection of plants, so that there is individual character, and then there's community character. And so when we think about the wine side of this, it really is about capturing community character. And we can do that obviously through looking at larger vineyard sites in total. We can do it as we see soil profiles change, because we know that those things do have an impact, in terms of like water holding capacity, for instance, and how that relates to clay content in any given soil, or how fractured and friable the ground might be, and how quickly those nutrients and resources and water might move through the ground rather than becoming available to the plant. We can look at that topographically, and through different elevations and aspects within a vineyard, so that even in our 6 acres of Pinot Gris, I mean, this year we'll end up bottling 5 different Pinot Gris wines, all from within 6 acres of plants, and all for different reasons that are related to both the pieces that we don't see, all that life and the impact that has on the vines, and then obviously the things that we can also walk through the vineyard and touch and taste and smell, and that one hillside is going to be different than a little bit of a flat part. The east side is different from the west side, and things. if they appear to be different, that I think in this sense, because we're not under any sort of like market driven sensibility for the wines that we eventually bottle for Antiquum Farm, that we're really looking for articulating Stephen and Nikki and Jewel and Daisy's home, that like we're trying to articulate the farm. We're not in a rush to say, well, this should be this way. It truly is taking what we see, looking at that information, looking at data, the creative process, the principles, and the work in the cellar is to draw all of that into the process. How we ferment, the decisions we make in the cellar, how long we do things on skins when we're pressing, do we filter, how we use SO2, like all of those sort of cultural wine things. They don't come from what shows up in the bottle. They come from where it started on the farm.
Wow. So can you talk a little bit about that Pinot Gris?
But I think if you look at sort of the perspective of Gris historically in wine, and if you look at like the actual grape variety itself, it is an odd animal because it really does sit pretty much squarely between Pinot Blanc on one end and Pinot Noir on the other end. And so you have this grape variety whose cluster shape and growing habit looks, it's obviously part of the Pinot family, but is basically half ripened in terms of its color. And so with that phenolic, and on that side, the pigmentation of it, you have color that is basically unstable most of the time. So it's going to fall away and get pinkish and sort of a color that most people aren't used to in wine because it's in the middle. And then of course with that phenolic development being half ripened, you also get tannin, and often that tannin doesn't ripen fully, and so it ends up being kind of bitter, which is not a great flavor profile to have in the wine. And of course, if you're looking to other antecedents in Alsace, often Pinot Gris being blended with other aromatic grape varieties to have like floral pop with Gewürztraminer or muscatted things that make it really lovely. And then if you were looking at sort of the sea of Pinot Grigio coming out of northern Italy, it's often left with some amount of residual sugar to make the fruit pop, but also to mask some of that potential bitterness that comes from it. And both of those things are great, and they serve a purpose, and both in the market and for the flavor profile of those wines and how we engage with wine, and they're lovely. What we saw was that Antiquum Farm, particularly for Pinot Gris, it just looked and behaved differently. And instead of going, this is how Pinot Gris is supposed to be, we went, well, this is the Gris that's in front of us. So what do we do with the Pinot Gris that's in front of us? And the decision is then to embrace it as fully as possible. So within the 5 wines that we'll bottle this year that are from that 6 acres of Pinot Gris, there are areas where the skins look one way, and so we use some amount of a cold soak in the cellar in order to draw on some of that color and texture. But we don't want to necessarily ferment on those skins. And so we can drain off and press and have a wine that appears to be rosé in color, but is still full and rich and really tastes of a particular part of the vineyard. Or we can look at the far western side of that Pinot Gris area, and there it's really slow ripening on the far western side. And so when we see more slow ripening things, and in that sense less sugar development, over time we get more flavor profile and more skin development. And so we make that, there's like 6 rows that we ferment as we would Pinot Noir, and essentially making a fully like red wine process brought into Pinot Gris, because that's what that part of the vineyard looks like. And then still we can do direct press and make a hopefully a beautiful white wine that comes from the middle 2/3 of the vineyard, where there is more there's more water availability. The canopies are bushier and bigger, and so the acids hold really, really differently as a result of that, because there's more crop there. And so using that as an area to go, okay, this looks more like if we were going to make a white wine, this is that area. And so that's the part where we look at white wine production.
Huh. Wild.
The Pinot Gris side of it really was taken from what was happening in the Pinot Noir, because there was that sense of like, that Pinot Gris just felt second fiddle. And we looked at, Stephen's farming the entire farm the same.
Right.
And of course, in the Willamette Valley, we're like, we're ringing the gong for Pinot Noir and driving it home. But it was looking at all of the attention that was being paid to Pinot Gris or to Pinot Noir and going, well, we should pay attention to the Gris the same way.
Yeah.
So that's part of the lead in within our own, little 140 acres of why we started looking differently at Gris. And it came from having, a 14.5 acre vineyard with 6 different selections of Pinot Noir planted, and seeing that in that area, if we, giving it its full due, both on the farm and in the cellar, there were so many different expressions coming from 14.5 acres that it wasn't just a simple, pick it, ferment it, and go for it. It was, looking at the ripening cycles and lots of sampling, and doing things qualitatively in the vineyard first in order to make the process in the cellar work better, such as night picking, which is not a normal thing in Oregon, certainly not in the Willamette Valley. It's I think Antiquum Farm might be the first night picked site. Is that, Stephen? Is that
I don't think we're the first because I resisted for a while. We're definitely, I think we're still by far the only place night picking, in the southern end of the valley for sure. But yeah, we were early adopters. The reason that we began doing it is only one of many benefits that we discovered through the process to doing it. And so now there are a myriad of logistical reasons that we continue to do it.
Is there? I would love to hear that, because I mean the only one that I can think of off the top of my head would be the temperature. I imagine you guys have still pretty warm days, or can have some pretty warm days in the fall there.
They end up being relatively cool. I mean, when we're, like a season like 2021, where we're picking earlier than we ever have before, for sure, you definitely can get to warmer temperatures.
Okay.
There's also a huge piece of quality control. So when we can, particularly for Pinot Noir, where we're not crushing the berries when we're destemming, having cold fruit means that we can get more whole berry when we destem.
Right.
So there's a real advantage to that, and the fruit holds its temperature, in half-ton bins much better. That thermal mass isn't going to change. So if something, if for instance a piece of equipment breaks when we're processing in the morning, we're not risking any sort of microbial issues simply because the fruit is 40 degrees or 39 degrees, when it hits the deck. But there's also an amazing labor reality to this as well, where, if you imagine Oregon, I think the state is by grape variety, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the state is planted to one single grape, and that's Pinot Noir.
So when the dinner bell rings,
right,
everybody's picking, right?
Everybody's fighting for the same plates, forks, napkins, trash bins, all of it. So if you flip that and you go, okay, well, what if we just pick at a different time? And then when pickers come work at the farm, they can also then have a break, grab a meal, grab a quick nap, and they can also start picking again when the sun comes up. All of a sudden you have a really different labor situation that also directly relates to the quality of the fruit for the winery,
right?
And then affects energy use, right? So if I don't chill down tanks that we put Pinot Noir in the winery,
right?
Because there's no need to. The fruit's going to stay cold for a very long time, when it hits, when it's in 6, anywhere from 1 ton to 6 ton increments in a vat. Like you can't heat that up without doing it artificially.
Right.
And so it's really stable, really, really stable. So there's really fascinating elements that we have an opportunity to look at that addresses needs that affect community and culture and wine quality and value systems and all of those kinds of
Yeah,
things.
it also becomes really stabilizing for our relationships with picking crews, because that can be something that you know the other side of that, the dynamic you can enter into is that you just have a new set of faces and new people every year. The nice thing about night picking is, with a day pick, you're starting at sunrise, so that's that time of year right about 7 a.m. And then if you're trying to keep things relatively cool, you're finishing your pick by 10:30. For us, I was always trying to be saying like, look, we are loading the truck by 10 a.m., which makes
Right.
this incredibly short window. And maybe you have people
Right.
driving an hour and hour and a half to come down here. So to get it done in that time frame, you have to have 3-4 times the amount of people that we use for a night pick. So what's
Right.
nice is it's cooler, it's better conditions for the most part for the people doing the work, but they're also making 3 or 4 times as much money. So over time, we have better relationships with the people who are coming to do the work. We become essentially the hot ticket item. They want to come pick here, so we get better pickers, and so the work just becomes better, and people want to come back here again and again and again. And
Yeah.
that's just better for everybody. So that is kind of one of the unexpected things that came out of this was the relationship aspect of it, and having a predictable crew at a really crucial time.
Well, labor I know is a big thing, and you mentioned, maybe I don't know if you wanted to use this as a chance to advertise for a farmhand to come help out, but
Yeah.
or a free, just free cult member labor. Anybody interested in pitching a tent and worshiping at the Antiquum? How do you pronounce that? I would love to end on this. How do you pronounce your name, and how did you pick that name?
There is actually so we had a language. Who was the professor, Andrew, from the U of O? I can't.
It was someone who teaches in like ancient
Oh, I
languages.
couldn't remember who the particular person was, but we had an ancient languages from
Yeah.
professor from U of O come visit us one time, and so we finally asked her, and she told us that there's actually no correct pronunciation because nobody really knows. I've always rolled with Antiquum. Because I
Antiquum.
just like the way it sounds. I don't like, and the one pronunciation that she said would not be correct, because I think you're supposed to just like use all the vowels.
Okay.
Was Antiquum,
Okay,
but
that one's wrong.
I think like Antiquum but I like Antiquum because I just think it sounds cooler. So that's what I roll with is Antiquum Farm.
Yeah.
So,
and it means old ways in Latin.
Got it.
And just
like
and just
antique.
old stuff. So,
Old stuff, old
yeah.
shit. It's just old.
aging people, all of that.
I love it. Well, thanks, guys. How can people? I'll give your website here because I'm on it. It's antiquumfarm.com, and it's ANTIQUUM. That's the tricky announcement. Farm.com.
Yeah, you can
And
find us on Instagram if you want to see all kinds of cool videos of pigs eating funny things.
Yes, adorable things. Sheep. It's very cuddly and cute and informative and inspirational, I think. Your Instagram, that is. Any other ways people can come visit and taste? How does that work?
Well, it used to work a lot better when we had wine. So and we maybe somewhere down the road we can talk more about fire and its effect with smoke. But
ouch.
we chose not to bottle any wines from the 2020 vintage.
Heartbreak.
So we are currently out. Do not actually even have any wine anywhere in our possession.
All right. So this is January 22. When do you think
Yep.
when will the next wines be available?
It'll start back up in June. So
okay.
we've got a 5.5 month hiatus at this point, and but we're always looking for ways for people to come and engage. And I think the question we might not have really answered is that while wine is what keeps the farm economically thriving and moving, it's a carrot truly to extend to people to come and take some time away from where they are to explore a small American farm, a family who's put their heart and their blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, and that it's the draw for us. And of course, then as people, when they can purchase wine and take that home back to wherever they are, locally or regionally or nationally, hopefully internationally, that they take the values with them and the perspective and the questions and the curiosity and get to explore that as well. So we look forward to having people back at the farm, and folks can always contact us and be like, I'm in the area, like, can I come pet a pig? And we can try to make it work.
Well, just be careful of using all this extra time that you won't be selling wine to start any big projects that will force you to have added more to your plate in future years when you will be selling wine.
That's a good caution. We appreciate that.
I've fallen victim myself to that many times. But that's a really beautiful note to end on what you just said. So thank you for that. Both of you, thank you so much. It's really great to hear what you're doing. And I mean, I really want to come and experience it. I think it's been really informational for anybody. And I know there are people out there who I hope are thinking about this. So I think it's, you've been just a wealth of incredible information for the realities of making this happen. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. It was great hanging out with you, and really appreciate the time. It's great to get to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. We'll look forward to seeing you on the phone.
Definitely. Thanks.